Hi, Enviro students. Today we are going to review scientific method and compare sound science versus junk science. You are probably familiar with the visual of scientific method. A scientist makes an observation, asks a question, forms a hypothesis, designs and carries out experiments, and analyzes the results to determine whether the hypothesis is valid or not. If the hypothesis is not valid, a scientist will usually go back and look at their hypothesis or experiment to determine if they'd like to shift their work or rework it. Sometimes they will go and publish their work just to put the research out there and then say they had an invalid hypothesis. Moreover, if a hypothesis is found valid or partially valid, they can take steps to replicate their experiment to make sure that the research is sound, or they can send it out to peers in the field for review. Once they've had some peer review, typically they will go for publication in a journal, usually an accredited science journal, or post the paper online to get reaction and discussion in the scientific community. Environmental science is a slightly different animal than the rest of that type of scientific research. In environmental science, it's a different process because we're dealing with environmental issues. Environmental scientists often have to identify a problem occurring in an environment. So the observations aren't always things that occur in nature. Sometimes they have to spend time tracking an area to figure out what the problem is. And in many cases, they go beyond just finding the problem and try to work in finding solutions or mitigations for the problem they have identified. So I'm going to give you guys a little scenario here. So we have the adventures of Dr. Stickfigure. Here is Dr. Stickfigure, an environmental scientist from Sticky City. Stickfigure Town, 2 hours south of Sticky City, has reported a high number of dead fish in a southern portion of the lake in the town. Dr. Stickfigure travels down to observe what the residents are talking about in the town. Upon arrival, Doc discovers several dead fish floating in the water or in the beach at the southern point of the lake. He investigates several parts of the lake, but only finds large numbers of dead fish at the southern portion. He asks the question, what is killing the fish? What is in this location that is killing these fish? After surveying the area, he pinpoints a few locations that might account for the death of the fish. He believes it might be either a local chemical company that has a water discharge, a farming area that has fertilizers running off into the river at the northern point of the lake, or bacteria colonies that are forming on the lake during the warm summer months. He forms a hypothesis that the chemical from the chemical company or the farms is killing the fish. He works with a team to set up water collection around the lake. They collect samples from all areas of the lake on a weekly basis over the course of a year. Dr. Stickfigure performs water quality testing on the samples and compiles the data. He finds that water samples have high levels of phosphate. After speaking with the chemical company, he determines that they are not using such chemicals. Then he speaks to the farmers and finds that they do use fertilizers with high phosphate concentrations, which is causing algae blooms to form at the southern end of the lake. He reports the results to Stickfigure Town, which works with the Department of Agriculture to help farmers reduce their fertilizer runoff, and over time, the phosphate levels drop and the fish population stabilize. In this last section, you guys can see the comparison between the practices of sound science and junk science are listed out for you. I'm not going to read these to you. You guys, I'll leave this slide on for a minute so you guys can go through each of them, or you can pause the video to copy them down in your notes if you like. The most important part is sound science adheres to scientific practice that you guys saw at the beginning of this presentation. Junk science can be private claims or methods that do not use proper scientific method. So go ahead, look through those. If you have any questions, please ask them Monday in class. This final slide gives you guys several examples of where you would find sound science versus junk science. So sound science, you're going to be looking in those accredited journals. So to give you a few examples, if we're talking real scientific journals, you might find things in bioscience or science. There's the Journal of Ecology, there's the Journal of Environmental Science. So any of those where you go and you actually look up journals, those are usually legitimate sources and accredited, they're peer reviewed, they are repeated experiments. So those three key things that we saw at the first slide that you want to do in scientific method, these examples follow those. You might also go straight to the source. So if you interview or go back to a scientific team, those are wonderful sources to use. You can also have journalists that write articles based off of scientific research. So examples of places you could find articles like that: National Geographic, Scientific American. You can find several websites that are also run by journalists that use a lot of scientific information, the Audubon Society, the World Wildlife Fund. So as long as they're maintained and kept by people that are using proper scientific research or proper scientific knowledge, those are good websites. If you are looking at websites that don't have any sources, or they briefly reference something without really giving you the source or linking the source in, those would not be accredited. If you're looking at journals that are unpeer reviewed, those are not considered accredited journals. So go through this list, take a minute, pause the video if you need to, check it out, see what the differences between sound science and junk science are. In class on Monday, I'm going to show you guys a small video, or a very short portion of a John Oliver video that kind of has a funny spin on junk science. If you'd like to see the full thing, please look it up on YouTube. There is some inappropriate language, but it's really funny and shows a lot of great examples. So check that out if you'd like. Have a good weekend, guys. I'll see you Monday.